This is the escape wheel from a John Roger Arnold marine chronometer. As you can see, it's seen better days. The obvious missing tooth is an issue. It's also bent out of round and isn't going to be running true. The marine chronometer was sent to me for restoration and is in a pretty poor state of repair. The broken balance staff and various other broken components are issues that I'd have to resolve at a later date. But for now I'm focusing on the escape wheel and making a replacement in order to restore the proper functioning of the chronometer. Now, John Roger Arnold, son of John Arnold of longitude fame, part of the story alongside John Harrison to perfect the marine chronometer. He made his escape wheels in a specific way. His escapement was slightly different to what became the norm in terms of the detent escapement. His detent moves towards the inside of the wheel to unlock rather than the outside, which is one difference from norm, from the Earnshaw style. But the biggest difference is the fact that it transfers impulse from the escape wheel to the balance via a curved face of the tooth rather than the tip of the tooth as with the Earnshaw escapement. So as you can see here, these curves are actually a cycloidal curve to transfer a nice smooth power transfer onto the impulse face of the balance. The wheel is also tricky to make because of the undercut. It has this face cut, which is a relief section. So I need to work out the best way of tackling this. Looking at the different cutters that I'm going to have to use, 3 cutters in this instance. But for the handling the cycloidal curve, that's the believe it or not, the easiest part, because a conventional cycloidal wheel cutter will work. The undercut just happened to coincide with the angle that's on a deadbeat cutter, which is again a commercial cutter. So I was able to use that rather than making up a fly cutter. But for the gashing cut, the biggest material removal in between the teeth, I needed to make up a fly cutter. So best tool for this that I've found is to find an old blunt end mill and to just grind it up. Now to start the actual wheel making process, I wanted to use as an appropriate material as possible. In this case I'm using cast yellow brass known as clockmaker's brass. Now, this is beautiful in colour, but it's a very soft material, so it needs to be work hardened. So I hammered it up into a hardened state. Now I can, with it hammered up, I've got a blank of material that I've got available to me. But I need to just ascertain what the outside diameter is of the wheel. Now, with it being 15 teeth on this wheel, I can't measure across the teeth with a caliper, with a vernier gauge. So what I tend to do is to turn up a ring, as you can see me doing here, that I can nicely fit the wheel into, and then take the dimension from there. I find that the best way of measuring chronometer escape wheel outside diameters as a general rule. Now that I've got all the dimensions that I need, I can machine up my prepared piece of cast brass and start making the blank ready to cut the chronometer escape wheel teeth. First thing to do is the outside diameter, but then I need to move on and drill a hole using the center drill, and then drilling it through with the borehole size for mounting it. Then the recess needs turning in. I decided to turn the recess first so that I wasn't machining into the cut teeth to protect the strength of the teeth as much as possible. That proved to be a mistake, but I'll come to that later. With the Chauvelin 102 set up and the dividing head engaged, and set to the right number of divisions with the right plate on, I can then start preparing the rest of the machine and getting set up for cutting the teeth. I centered the cutter, or rather I referenced the cutter so that I knew the where the cutter position was in relationship to how the teeth are going to stand up on the wheel when cut. Offsetting the cutter would affect the rake of the teeth. Now I need to touch off the cutter so that I can get the height correct for or rather the depth of cut correct, and dial that in. I use the vertical slide with an indicator to dial in the calculated depth of cut so that I could cut it in one pass. Again, this proved to be a little bit of an error, but it seemed to be the thing to do at the time. Unfortunately, the cutting forces proved rather higher than I was anticipating, and although they were okay at first, as the cutter started to dull from passing through the relatively dirty cast brass material, the cutting forces increased, and you can see here it's destroyed the blank as it starts off okay, but as it moves around the wheel it's bending the inner diameter in, so that was not ideal. The cutter also suffered. It took the tip off good and proper, not chipping it but actually wearing it away. So I had to start again with the cutter, which is not always a bad thing because I think the second one was actually a more appropriate shape. I was more pleased with the profile that I managed to achieve on the second cutter. So I need to make sure that the cutter is flat in terms of the reference to the face of the escape wheel. And then, unfortunately, passing up that work that I've done, and then the new material that I've chosen to use is CZ131, which is a very yellow modern brass. It's much nicer to work with and much more wear resistant, much similar in properties to the yellow brass rather than 121 modern brass, which is very pink and also wears very badly. But the 131 does machine very nicely, as you can see, and so I decided to use this. I'm making up several safety net of not having to go back to square one if I need to redo my work, so it's always a good idea to make up what could be several blanks in one go. An important part of the method I'm using to make this wheel is to do everything in one setup. So I'm maintaining concentricity and getting the wheel to be as accurate and concentric as I possibly can with the tools that I have available to me. So after boring out the center hole, I can then move on, and I need to set up the cutter. So I'm using the old wheel just to give myself a loose idea of where the cutter is going to be and make sure it's doing what I think it's going to be doing. I'm not particularly setting up using that wheel, but it's just giving me an idea of what's going on. So with the cutter set up, I need to set up the dividing head, and on my Shawbin 102 I've got the mechanical dividing head. I'm not using a computer controlled one in this instance, although I do sometimes on occasion. So with the dividing head set up, I move on and I'm cutting the gashing cut, as I call it, the initial pass, which cuts the bulk of the material for the space between the teeth. This will give one finished face to the tooth, which on a normal chronometer wheel would actually be the impulse face, but on the Arnold style of wheel this is a relief surface, so it doesn't actually present to the impulse face of the escapement. The impulse face on the Arnold, as I mentioned earlier, is a cycloidal curve on the back of the tooth. which is a sort of a genius move from Arnold. It does have its downfalls in terms of wear and the manufacturing process, both being a higher level of wear and also the manufacturing process being a lot harder, I think, anyway. Maybe Arnold didn't feel the same. I would love to have known how Arnold actually went about making this wheel back in the 18th century. I presume it would have been something along the lines of what I'm doing, but with what looks to be more primitive tooling, although in many respects it's more dedicated tooling, so could actually be argued as being more suitable than the tooling that I'm using. As you can see, the cycloidal curve of the commercial wheel cutter is spot on for this wheel. The old wheel, the curves are all they're all higgledy-piggledy. Every tooth seems to be a bit different. Again, there's been a fairly high level of wear involved in the wheel, and then it looks like these teeth have all been dressed down to try and compensate for that. But that means that every tooth is slightly different on this wheel now. But I get the idea that it would have been a true cycloidal curve originally, which is what I am going to achieve with the cycloidal curve of the commercial wheel. Now, being all set up, I could make the cut and cut the curved face, impulse face of the teeth. Now, with those first two cuts complete, I need to move on and machine the center section of the wheel, the recess. This will actually cut into the teeth as I'd cut, so I was a little bit nervous about doing this, but it all worked out just fine. I went back to using the plug that I'd made earlier to make sure that I was getting the dimension right. In terms of difficulty, I find this bit to be the trickiest section. I was using a commercial deadbeat cutter, but cutting the face relief on each tooth was took quite a bit of setting up. I really do need to tool up with a better microscope system in order to better visualize what's going on at the cutter, because it's really tricky getting in there with an eyeglass, and I actually found using my phone for the video was helping, because I could zoom in and see what was going on. But it all worked out nicely, and I was left with this rather pretty escape wheel. Now, I've still got a lot of work to do crossing out the escape wheel. The crossings are all done by hand with drilling out the initial spaces and then working with piercing saw and file. But before we get to that point, I need to part off the wheel, And then again, all about concentricity. I turned a little spigot onto a sacrificial piece and then super glued the wheel into the recess, so it's registering as accurately as I could get it to anyway on the center bore of the wheel, and then I could face off the back of the wheel down to the thickness and get the correct thickness for the crossings. As I mentioned earlier, the next phase is to cross out. Now, to get a nice crisp crossing, I find the best thing to do is to use a crossing out jig. I start by machining a recess to accept the outside diameter of the wheel, and then an internal diameter that is the inside of my crossing. I then make a second piece. This is all out of EN8 steel, by the way, which is hardened and temperable. I'm going to leave it in the hardened state, but I turned out this series of recesses in order to give me a guide to file up to. Now the disc that I'm just marking up now, this is going to be the actual crossing guide. So this needs cutting to represent the crossings that I'm going to be cutting into the wheel. If you're managing to follow what I'm doing here, I'm going to end up with the internal radius and a nice short sharp corner for the crossing, using this method of two parts. So I just offered it back up to the old wheel to get an idea of if the crossings were accurately divided, and then put it into the lathe in order to mark it into 4 divisions for the basis of the crossings. Once I'm happy with the crossings being marked up, the rather tedious job of sawing and filing out is obviously the next stage, which leaves me with the 3 parts of the jig. And as I said earlier, in order to use them as a filing guide, I like to harden them and leave them dead hard. The steel would probably be hard enough to go up to as a sort of a single-use jig, But as I said earlier, the idea is that I don't want to repeat work. So if I do make a mistake and want to go back a stage and use one of the blanks that I left myself with earlier, I don't want to be making another jig. I want to have a jig that is reusable. So leaving it in a hardened state gives me that. This is borax, which I just dip into some meth and then dip into the borax. That helps to reduce the oxidization so that you're left with a fairly clean part after hardening and without a load of scale etched into the surface. With the parts hardened, I was left with the fairly easy job of assembling them. Although you do have to be a little bit careful that you get it right, because remembering this is in a dead hard state, it's quite easy to just chip one of your crossings off at that point. So you have to be a little bit careful. And as I said earlier, the idea is to leave myself with a nice sharp guide to try and get some sharp corners into the crossings. The guide will also help to protect the teeth while I'm working on the wheel. Obviously, the teeth are the most important part of the wheel, and I didn't want to risk damaging them. So the wheel gets sandwiched into the jig, and I use super glue to hold it all in place. You can use shellac; it does the same job really, but I find the super glue is more reliable as a work holding, and is dissolvable in acetone later, so it is easily dismantleable. Now the crossing out jig is to help you cross out, it's to give you a guide to file up to, but it doesn't do away with the many hours of tedious sawing and filing. And my advice is that this is done slowly and take your time, and you work your way up to the finished faces. You don't rush up to them, because it's surprising, even with the filing jig, how easy it is to overshoot and to come out with crossings that are wonky and too thin, and then the wheel is scrap. Once the wheel is crossed out, the jig needs to be dismantled, and I did that just by soaking in acetone, which destroys the super glue. And then the jig, in theory, just will come to pieces and allow you to extract the wheel. Having extracted the wheel from the jig, this is always a great moment, because you get a chance to inspect what you've made. So the original wheel and my replacement, with a slightly bigger centre bore hole, you may notice, I was happy with. There were one or two things that I would have done differently if I was to make it a second time, but none of them were glaringly obvious enough to, or mechanically detrimental enough to warrant me going back and doing it again. And to get it absolutely true, I made a new, well, I'd actually made a new arbor in this instance. I had to drill through the original pinion and put an entirely new arbor in. But I made a new collet, and then turn the collet between centres on a watchmaker's turns. This is the best way of making sure that the wheel goes on to the arbor absolutely concentrically. With all the hard work making the replacement wheel behind me and a lot of other work done on the escapement on this that is not shown in this video, I always love getting to the point with a chronometer where you can test the impulse and make sure that you've got sufficient impulse. Now with a chronometer you only get impulse in one direction, and the impulse needs to be sufficient to overcome the unlocking, the frictional forces and the force of actually moving the detent spring out of the way, and do that by just moving the balance in the direction it's going to receive impulse without a balance spring fitted. And the tell that it is got sufficient impulse to overcome its unlocking friction is that it should accelerate, and you can see it does exactly that here. It accelerates really briskly, so I was happy that everything was as it should be with this escapement now, and that it was receiving impulse from those curved faces. After any involved restoration, it's always the best moment when you can have the thing assembled and let it take its first serious ticks. And in this instance it was running really beautifully. I had to make all the usual adjustments to the escapement and a few future adjustments from this point, but it was performing admirably straight off, so I was really pleased. And I feel that hopefully Arnold would have been proud of the fact that this chronometer is now set to function for another 200 years, provided it is it's suitably serviced and looked after from this point, of course. Thank you as always for watching. If you enjoy these videos and would like to support me and help me to continue to make them, then please do check out my Patreon page, where you'll find other supporters of my work. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next video.